Okay, my friends, so you're back, which means that you have seen the film Halloween. Once again, I have to say that I really cannot add anything new to the conversation. The film has been talked about and written about so many times, and by so many people much smarter and much sharper than I could ever hope to be, that it is impossible for me to add anything new to this. So if you're coming here trying to find something new or anything like that, unfortunately you've come to the wrong place, because I really have nothing additional to add, except just basically what my own views and feelings are, which I think have a lot in common with what has already been said about this film many a time. But I would like to say that this film, as I said, is one that is incredibly close to my heart, and I adore it so deeply. I adore it for many reasons, but just generally speaking, it is one of those key important films for me growing up, and therefore it's my pleasure to be able to share with you just a few thoughts that I have about this remarkable achievement in cinema. John Carpenter's career, I think, has a lot of high points, a lot of masterpieces, but Halloween undoubtedly is in the top tier pantheon of his filmography, undoubtedly. There are so many things that come from this film that I think form the basis for many of John Carpenter's works going forward, which would be very interesting to keep in mind as we go through his filmography one film at a time. Of course, we see Deborah Hill playing a very key creative role in the creation of this film as a co-producer and also co-writer. And also we understand that based on certain comments made in the commentary and elsewhere, she's actually also had a hand in directing some of the scenes that were included in the final cut of Halloween. And so we have the Deborah Hill and her contributions, and of course she will play such a key important role in John Carpenter's career going forward. So it's very important to remember the contributions of Deborah Hill here. It's also important to remember that we see also actors that some actors we see were actors that appeared in prior John Carpenter works. So in particular, Assault on Precinct 13, if you recall, had actors such as Nancy Loomis and Charles Cyphers. Well, of course, they appear in Halloween here as Sheriff Brackett and also Annie. This is a sense of the sort of the group of actors, the acting troupe, if you will, that John Carpenter will tend to work with on more than one occasion. We also see the appearance of Jamie Lee Curtis, and this is the start of an incredible career that she'll have and that she continues to have. It's an amazing actor that she is, Jamie Lee Curtis, and she is also an actress that will be seen in other John Carpenter films going forward. She also has a very significant family background in the context of cinema. In particular, this is something that has been remarked upon many a time, but her mother is Janet Leigh and her father is Tony Curtis. So this connection between Janet Leigh, who of course is so famous for her role in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960, and Jamie Lee Curtis, who appears in the main role here in Halloween, obviously augments the deep connection that this film already has with the films of Alfred Hitchcock, and in particular the film Psycho, which I'll hopefully get into in a moment. So, and also we have what are some others? We have the appearance, for instance, of other actors Nick Castle as well. We also have people on the crew, which we will see, which we have seen before, but we will also see again, or we're seeing here for the first time. So we're also seeing a group that is beginning to congeal, or that is beginning to find focus, in the sense that these are people that we will see in other films in the John Carpenter filmography. So Dean Cundey is very important. Tommy Lee Wallace is very important. Nick Castle is incredibly important. So, and others, of course. So this is, in many ways, this and Assault on Precinct 13, of course, they come early in John Carpenter's filmography, but they stand as being incredibly significant when you're talking about the growth and development and the progress of the filmography going forward. But there is so much that can be owed to these early films, and in particular Halloween, in terms of the look, the style, the craft, both in front of the camera and behind, is all due to the sort of the force of will as an artist and a cinematic genius that is John Carpenter. So this film is, in many ways, the start of something really great. And it itself is a great film. So what makes this film so great? There are, as I alluded to also, certain key links to the past of cinema. Now, if you recall, in the film Assault on Precinct 13, in that film discussion, we were talking about how there were many links to the past in terms of Howard Hawks films, John Ford films, Night of the Living Dead, Sergio Leone, Once Upon a Time in the West, etc. So that film was linking to the past, but also paying homage to the past, the richness of the cinematic past that John Carpenter really loves. Well, Halloween is no exception to that. We see that love and respect for the cinematic past. We see that just once again turned up to such an interesting level. I alluded to the connection to Psycho with respect to the fact that Jamie Lee Curtis features in this film, and she is, of course, the daughter of Janet Leigh, who starred in Psycho in a very famous role in that film, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Her character's name in that film was Marion Crane. Also in that film, the character of Marion Crane had a boyfriend who was played by the actor John Gavin. Now, John Gavin played the character whose name was Sam Loomis. Well, wouldn't you know that the Donald Pleasance character in the film Halloween, his name is Sam Loomis. So that is no coincidence. And also, if we stay with Alfred Hitchcock for a moment, there is a wonderful sense of style in the way certain scenes are shot in this film Halloween that are so reminiscent of the film Psycho. Now, I'm going to try to be as vague as possible because this isn't a discussion of Psycho, and I don't want to spoil the film Psycho for those of you who haven't seen the film Psycho, so I will be as vague as possible. But there are certain, there are certain sequences in the film Psycho. For instance, there is an actor in Psycho who's Vera Miles, and she plays a certain character in that film. And there is a house in the film Psycho as well, which figures in very significantly into the plot of the film Psycho. And there's a great deal of suspense generated when we see, around the latter half of that film, Vera Miles' character slowly approach the house by herself. And it's basically a shot of her walking towards the house, and then cuts to a shot of her point of view as we slowly approach the house, and then cuts back to her, and then cuts back to the house. And that kind of progression as she slowly walks up and then she enters the house, which is an incredibly high moment of suspense in that film. Well, there is a scene so eerily similar to that particular sequence, and in this film, in Halloween, it's a sequence where after the death of Linda, and there's some suspicion on the part of Laurie the Jamie Lee Curtis character. She doesn't quite know what's going on. Something is not quite right. And so she, being in the house across the street from Lindsay's house, where Annie was babysitting Lindsay, and where all the violence of the film has been taking place up to now, Laurie decides to leave the two children, who are Tommy and Lindsay, who are sleeping upstairs. They're sound asleep sleeping. So she decides to leave the house and walk towards the house on the other side of the street. Right? The same setup with, it's like she is Vera Miles in Psycho. Jamie Lee Curtis is like Vera Miles in Psycho, and it's the same sort of setup. And in fact, the music is added on to the soundtrack in a really soft, ominous way, just as the Bernard Herrmann score in Psycho is added on to that sequence as Vera Miles approaches the Psycho house. So that is a direct visual link to the cinematic past a la Psycho. There are also other scenes that are very reminiscent. There's a particular moment in terms of wandering through the house and not knowing what's going on, not knowing when some kind of moment of horror or shock will erupt. And that is true also in Halloween. In particular, there are some moments where Laurie is walking through the house, wandering the house. She walks through the back door, through the kitchen, and there's a moment where she's about to open the closet, right? And this is, if you recall, moments earlier where Michael Myers erupted through the closet and attacked Bob, and then basically impaled Bob on the wall there. Moments later, we have Laurie walking through the exact same kitchen. She's about to open the closet door, but she doesn't. She resists at the last minute, and she just wanders to the kitchen. I have a sneaking suspicion that perhaps Michael Myers might have been in that closet, or maybe he wasn't. He was probably upstairs in that room next to the bedroom all the time. But that's such a really just an incredibly suspenseful moment, and then the suspense just becomes so agonizingly elongated as she wanders through the house and eventually finds her way upstairs into the bedroom, where she discovers, of course, the dead bodies of her friends, and the Judith Myers tombstone, which is really quite remarkably planted up there on the bed. I still to this day, I don't quite know how Michael Myers was able to do that with such skill and dexterity. He really did a good job with putting the tombstone up there. But anyway, that's beside the point. But my point is that that traveling through the house is much like some sequences in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. There is a similar kind of sequence that occurs early on with the Nancy Loomis character, Annie, when she is she can't find the car keys, right? So she walks back into the house and tries to get the keys, and she's by herself, and it's dark, and the camera sort of pivots, and as she's walking from the living room on her way outside, and as it pivots, we don't know if Michael Myers is going to erupt from the other side of the screen or not. I mean, it's an amazing moment of tension and suspense, and it's very similar to the kind of vibe that was achieved by Alfred Hitchcock in Psycho. But again, it's in this 1978 horror film setting. It's in sort of this crisp, cold, shadowed color rather than the black and white film cinematography of the earlier Hitchcock film. So there are linkages, yes, but then there are also feelings that this is indeed a modern horror film. But still one that has a respect for the cinema of the past, in particular Alfred Hitchcock. There is also an homage, I think, or a kind of feeling of a link to the past with the film Night of the Living Dead. If you recall, very early in the film, when the Donald Pleasant's character is Smith's Grove, Illinois, and they're going, this is the day before Halloween, and it's raining, right? And then we see the point of view through the car, and because this is the point where they're supposed to pick Michael Myers up and transport him after giving him Thorazine. But then we see it's a rainy night and it's dark and there's lightning, and then as they approach the sanitarium, we see the patients wearing their white gowns wandering the grounds outside, and it's quite an eerie moment. And then that's when the music starts to kick in, and it reminds me so much of the zombies. And in particular, there are certain zombies that wander the grounds outside the farmhouse in the George Romero film Night of the Living Dead, if you recall. I mean, there are some zombies that have a similar kind of costuming, that white gown, and that's a black and white film as well. But I love that moment in Halloween here, because they look like the zombies from Night of the Living Dead. So I love that linkage with that past film. And indeed, we saw a linkage between Assault on Precinct 13 and Night of the Living Dead as well. So I love how this tradition of linking back to Night of the Living Dead has continued on through Halloween. It also is great because Night of the Living Dead is such a staple, such an iconic milestone of a horror film, just as strong of a milestone as Halloween is. And so it's nice to see these two tentpole films, if you will, linked in this quite striking manner. It's really quite astonishing the more I think about it. Oh, and there are also other linkages that we did see glimpses of in the film Assault on Precinct 13. Let me point out the fact that the sheriff here, who is played by Charles Cyphers, who of course we saw in Assault on Precinct 13 as Officer Starker, here he plays the sheriff, who is also the father of Annie, and his name is Brackett. His name Brackett is as it appears on the end credits of the film Halloween. It later is revealed in the end credits of Halloween 2 that the character's name is Lee Brackett, and Lee is spelled Leigh, and Brackett is Brackett. So I think anyone who knows, for instance, Rio Bravo, and also Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, among other films, will recognize the name of Lee Brackett as a story writer and screenwriter. So this is another great linkage to the cinematic past. So there are these linkages to the past, I think both quite obvious and maybe also not so obvious, but still they are there. And it just shows the kind of artist that John Carpenter is. He's thinking ahead, he's forging his own path forward, but he's also paying deep respect to the past and to what films that he loved. Of course, I didn't even mention the fact that even in the film itself of Halloween, as you know, it's very famous, but we see characters, in particular Tommy and Lindsay, the two children, and also Laurie in some respects. They're watching movies, old horror movies and science fiction movies on TV during this night of Halloween. And the two films that are featured, one quite prominently is The Thing from Another World, and the other is Forbidden Planet. You get a scene or two from Forbidden Planet, but that's about it. But it's more or less, more prominently is the film The Thing from Another World. So this is, of course, very huge, very, very huge, not only in the sense that we see homages to and direct references to past horror and science fiction films, which formed, I think, the bedrock of John Carpenter's own cinema-loving life, as he himself has acknowledged, I think, many, many a time in both interviews and commentaries. But also, of course, this will be a direct link to what we will see later in John Carpenter's filmography, of course, when we come to his film The Thing. But we see it here. It's a direct reference, and oh boy, what a great reference it is, because not only do we see it played, but we also see the way in which these films are integrated into the storyline of Halloween, right? Remember, as the two children are watching on TV and we hear the soundtrack of the film, Tommy goes to the window and he sees the moment where Michael Myers in shadow, in silhouette, is very eerily carrying a body, which we assume is the body, now the dead body of Annie, walking around the house into the front, which is great, which is played at the same time as the soundtrack from the TV film is being played over the soundtrack. So it's a really great moment of integration. Past collides with present in order to not only pay respect to the past, but also augment a moment of horror that is occurring in the present tense, in order to propel something, in order to exponentially heighten the tension, which is in a way paving a way forward for the future. So it's in a weird way, past, present, and future are coming together in that particular moment, and it's an amazing feat. So I find that this film, Halloween, serves as a kind of, how should I put it? It's not only a time machine, but it's going into the past, but it also is using elements of the past in a way that is modern, at least modern for the time, and also very fresh for the time, and also in a way that just heightens the terror and suspense in very creative ways. So well done. Well done, and it just shows, again, just another reason why it's so easy to love the cinema of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, because it's so obvious that they love genre cinema, and they respect where the types of cinema that their films come from, and they appreciate that, and they take advantage of it, and they don't shy away from that. They are proud of their genre roots, so to speak, and they turn this stuff into pure gold when they do. So that, I think, is a real fundamental, significant point about this film, Halloween, from the get-go.